Welcome, my achievement hunters and collectible gatherers. This is episode 7 of the Complete Critique series, where I pick apart some of your favorite games to see where they excel, or maybe even where they fail. Today, we will be revisiting the isolated planet of Talon 4, and also the very game where Samus first encountered the dangerous substance Phazon. In other words, we're taking a deep dive into the first entry of the Metroid Prime series. But before that, really quick story time. So the year is 2010. You're a 7-year-old boy and your older brothers want to introduce you to a series that they grew up with. And this very game just so happened to be Pikmin 2 on the GameCube, baby! Anyways, 2 more years down the line and you're feeling like a big boy, okay? I mean, I'm not quite old enough to play Halo, so what's a more Nintendo-friendly alternative? Aha! What about that strange alien and all-around isolating series, Metroid? And so my brothers showed me Metroid Prime, the first game in a trilogy that would go on to define who I am. Okay, maybe that's a little extreme, though it's true to a certain degree that the way I approach video games now has been largely shaped by this game series. Other than the completionist inside me, it's also given me the chance to experience a rich story told through unconventional means. But let's be honest, little 9-year-old me at the time did not care about any of that technical stuff. I just wanted to shoot some awful aliens. Even so, it was the first step into a world of darker toned games and storytelling that I have grown to adore today. It's safe to say that Metroid Prime was one of, if not the first time I felt immersed in a video game's world building. And that begs the question, is Metroid Prime the perfect adventure FPS title that I had once thought it to be? Short answer to that is no. So, you're all free to go. Oh, and on your way out, feel free to take some life-size space pirate body pillows, courtesy of our science team, and have a free copy of the new hit book, To Kill a Mockingbird, while you're at it. Wait, you actually want me to talk about Metroid Prime and give it an honest critique? Fine, but I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for
the baby, and the baby, for the baby, of the baby, for the baby.
Alrighty, I'll be critiquing 8 otherworldly categories for our stoic bounty hunter today. These being storyline, gameplay, characters, enemies, locations, aesthetic, music, and content. Without further ado, let's completely critique Metroid Prime. Halt, wary traveler! This is an analysis and not just some layman's review. Meaning there will be plenty of spoilungas ahead. You have been warned. If it somehow wasn't obvious enough, Metroid Prime is a game that's near and dear to my heart. But let's be real for a moment. To really enjoy Metroid Prime's story, you have to go in looking at it through a specific lens, or in this case, I guess a specific visor. If you begin the game wanting a riveting character-driven narrative, the most you're probably gonna get is Samus taking names and blowing shit up. So if that sounds great to you, by all means, this is the series you want to play. But if you're looking for character interactions, you're out of luck. Metroid Prime sets the stage early on with Samus tracking a distress signal, and then the rest of the story is simply stopping these space pirates from being evil yet again. After all, you are isolated. This is your mission. There are no character interactions, 0 dialogue, and cutscenes serve a direct purpose of guiding the player's eyes to points of interest or establishing their surroundings. Now, real quick, I want you to recall what I said before this. You have to go in looking at it through a specific lens. So yeah, that lens I refer to is none other than the scan visor, or what I'd like to proclaim is the lifeblood of the first Metroid Prime. Sure, there's no direct plot being thrown at your face, but it would be sorely mistaken to say there's no semblance of story at all. If you're like me and take time to scan everything you can find, you're gonna get a much more satisfying story. Simple as that. And if you're someone that hates reading, well, you're cooked. Have fun looking at Samus's robo-ass the rest of the game. That's the most plot you're gonna get. First, let's take a look at the Chozo lore that discusses the events prior to Samus's arrival. Early logs detail Talon 4's Chozo as living amongst nature and being granted the ability of foresight. If that sounds familiar, that's because they're basically space hippies, tripping on the local shrooms and toking up some tangleweed on the side. What I found to be the most interesting were the bits written about their encounters with the Great Poison, or as we know it, Phazon. It was tragic reading about their futility in preventing the spread of the scourge and their despair in realizing that other planets could be suffering the very same corruption. Not all was lost though, since the Chozo were shown to do their utmost in minimizing the spread until their chosen one, Samus Aran, would arrive. These did an amazing job at displaying the threat of Phazon whilst also characterizing Talon Force Chozo as strong-willed, largely pacifistic, and dutiful. Moving on to the pirate data, these focused more on the events immediately following the fall of Zebes, in other words, the end of the first game. For those who don't know, Metroid Prime is said to occur soon after the original Metroid, meaning the pirate logs are quite recent. These pieces detail their attempts to enter the impact crater, the reconstruction of Ridley, along with numerous Phazon experiments. Additionally, they showcase the materialistic side of the space pirates. One such example of this is the log where they talk about destroying anything that is not of use to them, this including the sacred Chozo ruins. The sentence at the end bluntly summarizes their stance on spirituality, that being that the dead should serve the living, not hinder them. My favorite was probably the pirate data discussing the space pirates' difficulties in replicating Samus's arsenal, specifically her morph ball.
Sir, in the report it says 4 of the subjects were horribly broken and twisted after the morph ball experiment. To confirm, is this, broken bones broken, or, turn into Metroid feed broken?
Shut down the experiment. Just shut it down.
Sir, you never answered the—
I said shut it down, Kevin!
Also, as a quick side note, I love how each series of logs either start by saying they are translated or decoded. It gives a cool in-world explanation for how you're able to even read these in the first place. Along with those two types of logs, you can also scan a ton of the environment and its inhabitants. I'll expand on it further in the locations section, but the environmental storytelling was truly immaculate. A superb example of the story being told through scanning the environment is the beginning of the game on the frigate Orpheon. One of the few things you can scan outside the ship are these meteoroids floating by that have high concentrations of radiation from an unknown source. This, of course, is a subtle indicator of the meteor on Talon 4, which is leaking Phazon, or, surprise surprise, a substance that is highly radioactive. Once actually inside the frigate, the first large room you enter is quite interesting. Taking center stage, you first notice this hulking beast, lifeless on the ground, but that's not all there is to see. Scanning the creature shows it has trace amounts of radiation. Looking at the empty life pod holdings informs you that they were launched 6 hours prior to your arrival, and checking the nearby crates reveals that they are all holding biohazardous Phazon. Within this single room, you can probably piece together the tragic events that had occurred prior to your arrival. With the available evidence, you can assume that the space pirates were running tests on creatures using Phazon, which had gone horribly wrong. The scan visor adds to the richness of the lore, and as I see it, is a necessity to enjoying the experience that is Metroid Prime. Unfortunately, there are also some plot inconsistencies in which the scan visor cannot cover for. Samus losing all of her abilities from the elevator explosion on the frigate Orpheon still doesn't quite make much sense. I also never really understood how a Metroid entered the impact crater since the Chozo created a cipher barrier that is keeping even the space pirates out. And speaking of the Chozo, I don't understand how their artifact totems track the artifacts perfectly. Namely, the ones that the pirates had taken and moved from their original locations. Though I suppose that last one can be waved away with the simple phrase, bird magic. Either that, or they got some freaking Apple tags on their artifacts or something, I don't know. Unsurprisingly, a lot of the narrative requires suspending your belief, but that comes with the territory of being a sci-fi adventure. Prime is a perfect example of atmosphere and subtle storytelling, taking precedence over a clear plot, and it's great for that. Furthermore, all the optional environmental scans add flavor to said world that pushes the game beyond just another adventure for Samus. Though this is a double-edged sword, as those who do not want to scan and read everything will receive quite an underwhelming plot. There were also quite a few questions that were left ambiguous due to the game's scan-focused design, but were insignificant overall. So Metroid Prime does have amazing world building, but only after a decent amount of effort and reading is put in. The plot is otherwise non-existent. This led me to give Metroid Prime a less than stellar storyline rating of 6 out of 10. Metroid Prime is, believe it or not, a Metroidvania.
Wait, I thought it was a first-person
Sit down, Kevin! Anyways, as I was trying to say, Metroid Prime is a model Metroidvania in the sense that you explore an interconnected world, acquiring new power-ups that let you access previously locked areas. And you can bet your blast caps that this game does exactly that. Now, does it do it perfectly? No. But let me start with what it does get right. The process of obtaining new items is entertaining as always. Along with more energy tanks and missile expansions than I can count, there are various upgrades. This includes and is not limited to the staple Morph Ball, Ice Beam, and Super Missile, but also a new few additions like the Plasma Beam, Boost Ball, and Space Jump Boots. Starting with Samus's main 4 beams, I thought they were implemented well in their design, but could have been tweaked a little bit better. Luckily, them standing out was not an issue at all, as they all have their own little specialties. Power Beam is, well, Power Beam. It shoots, it kills, it's trusty. The Wave Beam is a little slower, but can activate electrical circuits, stun enemies, and cause machine-based enemies to malfunction. The Ice Beam is even slower, but can freeze enemies, which paired with a good old missile often decimates lesser foes. As an added bonus, it can even freeze fire-based obstacles, funny enough. And then there is the Plasma Beam, which is not as slow as the Wave or Ice Beam, and even sets enemies on fire. This monster melts ice, it melts enemies, and above all, it melts my heart. Aww. There was also the short-lived Phazon Beam, but this guy is only used on the final boss as a gimmick weapon. Not much to add there, it just, yeah, that's about it. On top of that, each of these standard beams had optional combo upgrades. Though, aside from the Super Missile, I did not find myself using these too much. The Wave Buster, Ice Spreader, and Flamethrower require missiles to function, and are basically enhanced versions of their respective beams. Except for Flamethrower, that one sucked ass. Please stick to Plasma Beam for your own sake. And you want to know what else sucked? The controls for the beams. And no, I do not mean the handling, that was fine. I mean the button mapping for dual stick specifically. Like, seriously, these controls had my fingers moving like they were an OC in the Matrix. To swap beams, you have to hold X and then select a beam. This felt awkward and was definitely a learning curve as opposed to the original controls. And don't even get me started on the beam combos, which looking back is probably the reason I didn't use them a lot. To use secondary fire, I have to charge the beam and then press the R button. The issue? Well, the buttons to use charge beam are either right trigger or A. Using right trigger meant I had to use 2 fingers, with one on right trigger and one on the R button. This is plain uncomfortable. And the other option was even worse, as holding down A makes pressing the R button easier, but I lose the ability to actually aim while doing so. And I can hear you typing furiously, you ancient Chozo ghost you. Just swap your button mapping! Which is fair, and usually I'd agree. But for some downright bizarre reason, Nintendo refuses to let you map your own buttons, instead providing only 4 of their own pre-made layouts. I'm aware that there's probably many workarounds I didn't think of at the time, such as like changing the entire console's controls, but my point still stands that the new dual stick layout was poorly designed. I mean, come on, my hands are only as human as the next guy. Okay, maybe not that guy. Damn, I think I got severely off track, guys. Sorry about that. Next up, I want to cover Samus's visors, a series of suit upgrades that are unique to the Prime games. I've talked a whole load about the scan visor, which is perfect as it is, but how about the other 2? The X-ray visor is quite novel, allowing you to see invisible platforms or through breakable walls. Its only notable downside was how little it was needed throughout the playthrough due to being such a late game ability. As for the thermal visor, I am glad it was scarcely needed because it looks awful. The added motion blur in the remaster and visual fuzziness did not help either. Honestly, when it came to dark rooms, I'd rather bumble my way through than use this headache-inducing visor. It was just that nauseating. It's a little sad when the eye strain migraine wombo combo is a little more challenging than the final boss. In comparison to the somewhat clunky combat, Metroid Prime nailed exploration. And when it comes to a Metroid game, atmosphere and exploration are integral. For one, having a huge interconnected map was quite immersive and made engaging with the world all the more exciting. Couple this with puzzles that are seamlessly integrated into the level design and typically satisfying to overcome, and you have yourself a grand time exploring. While a majority of these were simply match ability A with obstacle B, there were some notable ones that took skill. Samus's Morph Ball happened to have the most elaborate puzzles, my favorite being the Spider Ball section leading up to the Plasma Beam. Not only did this obstacle course make Plasma Beam feel more earned, it was slightly heart-racing with how high up it was. Falling down meant climbing all the way back up, and I didn't want to do that. I also liked the items that required Morph Ball bomb jumping, such as the Chozo Ruins Vault or Crushed Frigate Vents. I don't know how to put it, it just made me feel like a boss. And yeah, the newer Prime releases made Morph Ball puzzles a little easier since your first jump can be executed without a bomb, but it felt good nonetheless. Another memorable puzzle was this one back in Phazon Mines that contained a mining laser surrounded by destructible walls. And clearly, I wasn't just not gonna cause chaos, so I entered my Morph Ball, started spinning like crazy, and blasted away. This was a super simple yet memorable use of Boost Ball, and almost every other power-up has at least one of those moments. And I'm gonna say, but contrary to the common consensus, I liked the Chozo artifact puzzles. A good portion of them felt rewarding to find, often hidden in areas you've already passed through many times. Whether it was toppling the control tower, raising a secret pillar in the Life Grove, finding a shrine on the cliffs of Magmore Caverns, or rolling into a Phazon-covered tunnel. These were in clever spots you would have a tough time spotting, but therein lies the problem with Prime's artifact hunt. If you aren't familiar with their purpose, discounting them as yet another collectible, there's a good chance these will be ignored until much later in the game. The hints that are near essential for finding all 12 artifacts can be scanned in the Artifact Temple of Talon Overworld. Unfortunately, the game only points you in this direction near the end, resulting in a last-second scavenger hunt before the final boss. And while you can technically enter this temple from the moment you unlock missiles, it'll probably be overlooked unless you're particularly explorative. As for those focusing on progressing through the story, you'll probably be met with not one, but two birds. Looking back, Prime definitely emphasized exploration over combat. The different beams were really cool, having their own effects and uses, although the default dual stick controls complicated beam swamping and secondary fire, which is an issue when that's their default control scheme. The rest of Samus's arsenal, including her suit, Morph Ball, and visors, were mostly really fun additions to her gameplay. The outlier here being the thermal visor, which was seriously a downgrade in the remaster. As for exploration in Prime, it did it justice with the classic upgrade and traverse style of the 2D games. Puzzles were implemented well, and while often simple in design, felt satisfying to solve. Though it must be reiterated that the artifact hunt can be a frustrating last-second endeavor that can only be described as unnecessary padding. So there's outstanding, there's terrible, and then there's Metroid Prime, which receives an average gameplay rating of 7 out of 10. If I didn't make it clear enough, the adventure in Metroid Prime is a solo mission. You are alone with only yourself to rely on. Where this works wonders is for the atmosphere, being dreadfully isolated on an alien planet. This results in there being, well, no characters apart from you. But I gotta bloat the content of this section somehow! So you see, Samus here and I actually have a lot in common. She's a bounty hunter, I'm an achievement hunter. Both are very respectable roles in society and have an air of prestige about them. I can also get behind her lone wolf, silently lethal personality. I myself have been known to sleep alone without a nightlight on, so trust me, I get it. And just look at her sick-ass armor! Enough said. So there you have it, conclusive evidence that she's basically me, which is why I resonate so deeply with her. Therefore, 10 out of 10 character, Wagoon again. And it'd be inaccurate to say that's all there is to Prime's characters, as there are the other two primary races that play major parts in the narrative. Referring back to the Chozo lore and pirate data, the characterization of each group is done rather remarkably. One of the first things you may notice is the stark contrast in how each type of log is written, both in word choice and content. The Chozo had much more flowery writing, using a lot of descriptive phrases such as the tumbling currents of time's flow. This was even more true in the earlier North American iterations of the lore before being changed in the remaster. One look at the script titled Fountain shows that the rewritten texts were kinda simplified and made less alien, and in my opinion, kinda worse than the original. And then there's the fact that the new ones sorta misrepresent the messages of the earlier versions. The original emphasized the importance of the visions involving the fountain. It is a landmark of sacred significance, the life giver. Doesn't that name just inspire awe? This makes the closing sentence that much more impactful. The Chozo have premonitions of their holy structure becoming corrupt, leaving them understandably anxious. Switching to the revised version in the remaster, it still brings up the fountain, but chooses to highlight the iron will of the Chozo instead. So instead of this dreary script displaying the Chozo's uncertainty of the future, it comes off as more resolute and motivational. In other words, we are left with a Chozo glazing session. It's not the worst change in the world, but lamentably alters fundamental aspects of the original pieces. Alternatively, the pirates write in a straightforward, supercilious manner. It is apparent that the pirates place an importance on direct, informative reports as opposed to poetic scripts. Yet, on top of that is their evident disdain for anything spiritual in nature. I mentioned the log earlier about destroying Chozo structures, but another text of interest is titled Chozo Ghosts. This log recounts the deadly struggle of the space pirates against alleged spectral entities within the Chozo ruins. Now, in response, did the space pirates feel scared? Remorse for trespassing on these holy ruins? Anything of that sort? No, the initial reaction for these attacks is utter contempt towards the spirits. The pirates go on to assert that even ghosts can be destroyed. Now that is arrogant. They show no hesitation and definitely no fear of a higher power. All that matters is their tangible goals. In this case, getting inside the impact crater takes priority, regardless of the obstacle. I must reiterate that Metroid has never really been a series that thrives on interesting characters or an ever-evolving cast. Prime is no different, lacking spoken dialogue, human interactions, or distinct personalities. The closest it gets is through written text of the Chozo and space pirates, but even those were one of the few things that the remastered kinda butchered. It's obvious that a personable cast is not the main selling point of Metroid Prime, hence its final character rating of 2 out of 10. Inversely, the enemy lineup was certainly much more fleshed out. Between flora, fauna, machinery, spirits, and whatever the hell Thardis is classified as, there is an expansive amount of creatures to encounter. Yet again, the Scan Visor came in clutch, providing additional lore for enemies and justifications for their inclusion into the game. By that, I mean that Metroid Prime goes the extra mile in immersing me within its world through its thought-out foes. There are quite a few examples of complex relationships between the native inhabitants of Talon 4. For example, this mechanical device known as the Hive Mecha has been programmed to house and train wasps that dwell inside it. It's amazing that I get to see further evidence that Talon 4's Chozo were adamant on coexisting with the planet's wildlife. Or what about these sweet-tasting sap sacks we see that evolved, like numerous real-life plants, to deter any would-be consumers? And I also like the adorable puddle spores that extend their bodies to try and intimidate other creatures with their stature. Though a personal favorite of mine are the gliders, which mention a sport called glider riding. Wait, hold up. This is like the only entry that refers to something beyond the scope of Talon 4. I didn't know we were allowed to talk about the outside world. Makes me wonder what other activities people in the Metroid universe enjoy. Enemies also made decent use of Samus's arsenal during combat, much like the puzzles during exploration. The subsequent Prime games did this even better, but it's still seen within the first entry. There's enemies that require specific beams, others that can only be evaporated by the Morph Ball, and a handful that ask you to swap your visors. However, I have a few gripes about the enemies combat-wise. First, I'll go ahead and mention that Prime's creatures were kinda easy. Enemies hardly pose a threat up until about Phazon Mines, the final large area in the game, but this is due to the space pirates being a tad bit tanky. Additionally, late-game areas overused color-coded beam weaknesses. Elemental pirates match the color. Fission Metroids also match the color. The final boss itself, well, you better pray you're not a colorblind freak. This issue is further exacerbated by the atrocious enemy respawn rates. Like, holy shit! I could walk 2 rooms away, turn around because I forgot something, and be slapped by the fastest repopulation effort I've ever seen. Chozo Ruins becomes, no exaggeration, the worst backtracking experience I had with this game. Why? Because of my damn ancestors, of course. I'd clear a room of these nuisances, open a couple doors, and what is on the other side? I'd then do whatever I was doing, turn back, and oh, would you look at that? It's the magnificent mating call of the deceased! You know what? These space pirates were entirely justified to feel contempt for these stupid spirits. If removing them means demolishing their ancient ruins, then so be it! Oh, shit, sorry. They won't be docking my pay for that, right? Alright, I'm tired talking about that. Let's move on to something more exciting. Bosses! And when I bring up boss fights, I refer to only those that have actual health bars. Sorry, Invisible Drone, you're a pain in my plated posterior, but that's about it. Get wave bustered. I find Metroid Prime's big bads to be extremely memorable design-wise. Their battles, though, not so much. I love the intimidating scale, as these monsters are massive, making each one a spectacle to behold. The set pieces, physical appearances of the boss, and music went incredibly hard. And that's about where my praise ends, as the grandiosity of each fight really makes the lukewarm gameplay stand out. Most of the boss fights boil down to damage the boss, wait for its invincibility phase to pass, and then resume lighting it up. The tactics here are rather repetitive, and the only two bosses that had ever given me any ounce of trouble were the Omega Pirate and Meta Ridley. Omega Pirate continuously spawns those beefy elemental space pirates I mentioned earlier, and the arena is full of harmful phazon puddles. But if you know power bombs like I know power bombs, you know they make the fight essentially a joke. As for Ridley, he's a cakewalk while airborne, but the moment his wings burn up, the bastard becomes straight up lethal. The hitbox on his mouth can be infuriating to shoot, and I struggled to evade his ram attacks regardless of how well timed my strafing was. In fact, Ridley is the only thing on my hard mode run that dropped me below half health, leaving me on a whopping 29 units of energy. I scraped by. As for the final boss, Metroid Prime itself, it's okay and really nothing to write home about. The first phase feels like a test to see how well you can swap between beams, but with the abundant item drops and ample room to dodge, it's impossible to die. The second phase may have even posed less of a danger since it spams a single shockwave attack that is easy to dodge. Metroid Prime does summon other Metroids, but with both the Ice Beam and Power Bombs were not a problem. Though combat aside, the presentation of this battle was amazing. Chasing down the first form across not one, not two, but 5 sublevels drove home the magnitude of this fight. And the second phase, while simple, cranked up the hype as you get to blast the belligerent brain with the devastating Phazon Beam. Looking back, Prime's collection of creatures was wonderfully extensive, providing countless opportunities to interact with the fun weapon sandbox. But to be honest, I disliked the overuse of color-coded foes late game and the insane respawn proximity that all enemies shared. On the other hand, I do believe that the presentation of the bosses was superb, even if their actual battles leaned a little more on the repetitive side. It was an honor to face Talon 4's numerous dangers once again, and I think it's fair to leave Metroid Prime with an enemy rating of 7 out of 10. Okay, I'm gonna discuss the locations of Metroid Prime in a way I haven't really done in my past critiques. That is to say, I'm going to go area by area pointing out the triumphs and failures of each one. They contain memorable landmarks that prevent them from feeling overly generic. And then there's Magmore Caverns. There are diverse biomes that feel exciting to revisit as you accumulate more additions to your arsenal. And then there's Magmore Caverns. As for their size, the few locales present are huge, becoming even larger as you unlock new paths. Now say it with me everyone, and then there's the Impact Crater. Oh, and also Magmore Caverns. First off, can we just appreciate the introductory area that is the Frigate Orpheon? The game's atmosphere is set immediately as you receive a distress signal, but entering the ship enhances this feeling even more so. Along with everything I mentioned about it in the storyline section, it was also a really solid level for guiding new players. Early enemies in the ship are critically injured, which works both as cool foreshadowing to the boss and to help players get used to the controls. The escape sequence after Parasite Queen is especially near and dear to my heart, as it has you taking an alternative path from the way you came. All in all, it was a stellar introduction to an amazing game. Talon Overworld, the location Samus lands on after escaping the frigate, is a great follow-up. Comparatively, it is far more serene than anything you see back on the ship, with the lush greenery and consistent rain. Though I wouldn't call Talon Overworld anything too special, there are some outstanding places here. The Artifact Temple is neat, and I love how the architecture reflects the divine duty of the Chozo, or this window that looks like Samus's visor. Then there is the crashed frigate that discovering is truly a magical moment, and perhaps my favorite in the game. However, I'll expand on that more so down the line. I suppose the Impact Crater is notable as well with its eerie environment, but it's so short that I don't really have too much to talk about. I will admit though that the tooth-shaped rocks and pulsating red phazon gave this place a suitably creepy vibe. Next up is Chozo Ruins, the first major region that Samus enters, and similarly the first when it comes to telling a rich story through environmental cues. Remember how I mentioned the Chozo of Talon 4 were one with nature? Well, my favorite part about the ruins design is how excellently this idea is presented. For example, let's look at the Arboretum. A towering central tree with roots visibly growing beyond the walls shows the care that the Chozo took when constructing the room. And there are many examples of this interweaving between nature and Chozo structures. Another fantastic aspect of Chozo Ruins in particular was its deceptiveness. Whoa, back up. What the heck am I talking about here? Oh ho ho, well my friend, throughout your exploration of Chozo Ruins, the water here is quite, toxic.
Oh! Ew! Dude! What the fuck?
The reason I bring this up is that the texts scattered around mention a great poison, so you put 2 and 2 together thinking this refers to the polluted water that's everywhere. And by that point, you've already been deceived and fallen for the red herring. You see, this so-called Great Poison is ultimately revealed to be Phazon from the meteorite housing Metroid Prime. It's near masterful writing, to say the least. Give the player a warning about some disaster and then make them think they're dealing with it currently. By the time you eliminate Flagra, there's this notion that you've finally dealt with the Great Poison, as all the water returns to normal. Then encountering Phazon gives you that nice little, oh, that's what they were talking about moment. On to Phendrana Drifts, I agree with the general opinion that this area is visually breathtaking, and the remaster went on to make it even more true. The blankets of snow atop old, intricately built temples is a refreshing take on what might have otherwise been too similar to the buildings of the Chozo ruins. Further into Phendrana Drifts is the Space Pirate Research Lab Hydra. After the chaos that was the frigate Orpheon, it's the earliest encounter with a pirate stronghold that isn't falling apart. Inside, the metallic, lifeless interior contrasts everything you've seen up to this point, acting as an antithesis of the nature-friendly Chozo architecture. As for the final area, Phazon Mines, being the primary base of pirate operations, it doubles down on the grayscale color palette. And while this is thematically perfect, I kinda dislike this location. It handles the atmosphere well, the music is adequately foreboding, and the set pieces are indicative of the pirate's materialism, so why the distaste? I think it stems from the fact that it feels samey regardless of how deep you go. Other locations have a separate feel between the outer and inner sections of their respective maps, but the mines are the same old industrial facilities no matter where you're looking. I understand that you're supposed to feel tense and somewhat unsettled, and for what it's worth, the first visit does this just fine. It's the revisits or replays that turn this once threatening location into, frankly, an annoying venture. And while on the topic of annoying, it's finally time to address the most underutilized area in the game: Magmoor Caverns. I used to adore this region. Its explosive music and volcanic aesthetic are generally stunning. Then it slowly dawned on me as I was playing through the remaster. Isn't this literally just a long hallway to get between locations? Magmoor Caverns has a spectacular concept, and it was just wasted? Unlike other areas, it hardly feels like you delve deeper in, it's more like going from one side to the other. It never switches things up, throws away all non-linear design, and fails to introduce many new enemies upon revisits. In fact, the single room that made me go, whoa, that looks good, was the monitoring station as I was scaling the cliff sides. And for God's sake, there isn't even a boss or mini-boss to be encountered throughout the caves. Let me be clear, I have no qualms with Magmoor Caverns when it comes to visual aesthetics and thematics. I'm mainly disappointed that it was relegated to being a glorified hallway between more interestingly designed locales. Now, here are some side notes that aren't really area specific, but I still want to talk about them. Puzzles were integrated into the world design so well. One of the things I find attractive about the Prime series is how everything is implemented with purpose. Be that half-pipes built into the architecture, morph ball tunnels being ventilation systems in natural caves, or mechanisms made by other intelligent beings. This bleeds into the collectible items, which are equally hidden through level design. Upgrades are rarely chilling out in the open and can be found behind breakable walls, unlocked through contraptions, or hidden out of view. Though I must say that the elevator system between areas was not as great, and at times harmful to the exploration half of Metroid Prime. Here's an anecdotal experience that I and many other players had gone through. So let's say you finally clapped Thardis's, rock cheeks, but are quickly blocked by an ice door. Therefore, I, of course, want to go find the ice beam over in Chozo Ruins. I go from Phendrana Drifts through Magmoor Caverns and do a little bit of puzzling in Chozo Ruins. Upon obtaining the ice beam, I recall a door back in Talon Overworld that requires it, so I head straight there. I enter the crashed frigate, dive into the water, and what's that? I can't progress because Samus isn't able to swim in her hefty robo-suit? That checks out. Suddenly, I receive a message that says,
Gravity fluctuations detected, and they sure as heck ain't down here.
Dumbass.
"Oh, silly me! How could I possibly forget the ice door that I briefly caught a glimpse of right after killing Thardis?" So I slowly climb my way out of the crest frigate, go back through Talon 4, Magmoor Caverns, and back to Phendrana. I collect the gravity suit in a cave, then, and only then, can I walk through the edge of Phendrana, through Magmoor Caverns again, and back to the crest frigate. Now here's a question, class. What the hell was that? It was a pain in my confusingly well-defined arsenal, that's what. Moral of the story, L skill issue, L hunter. Never let a geographically challenged man give you directions. Alright, that was a little negative. Even so, don't be misled by my complaints. Sure, they are louder than the praises, but they do not ruin the amazing locations that are certainly there. When playing, I got to explore an immersive region with rich lore, well-integrated puzzles, and gradually expanding maps. Every location, regardless of their downsides, has distinct theming and establishes their unique tones flawlessly. As for said downsides, backtracking kinda hampered my enjoyment of Face on Mines and Magmore Caverns, the latter of which I believe could have been so much more than what we got. Talon 4's environments were impressive for the most part, and barring a few grievances, Metroid Prime manages to achieve a location rating of 8 out of 10. Man, Retro Studios really went wild with the graphical upgrades on this game. Seriously, I think it's easily in the top 5 best looking Switch games. And on top of that, it managed to preserve the integrity of the original. I'm not the first, and definitely not the last, to claim that Metroid Prime Remastered looks exactly how I remembered. And that statement has never been so true. I had to do the classic check the original to see if the visuals actually improved that much. Sure enough, it did. It did 100%. All of the locations had been facelifted drastically. Water looks drinkable. Monsters appropriately terrifying. Environment basically a nature walk. A random reflective mirror that everyone remembers surprisingly missing. For real, Retro Studios, where's my silly little reflection guy at? How can I possibly go on without seeing my beautifully chiseled self in a dusty old mirror? Negative balls out of 10 game. Truly unplayable. As for everything else, let's get to critiquing. Samus's assortment of anti-everything that's not her weaponry will be spending a lot of time on screen, since it's a first-person shooter. Luckily, her signature beams had plenty of thought put into their design. Their individual properties here help the beams stand out while simultaneously amplifying just how powerful they feel to wield. The power beam's nothing too special, just going pew 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 and such, but that's different for the others. Between zigzagging lines of electricity, chunks of ice, and streams of scorching plasma, the projectiles of each beam carry different weights. Also, very quick shout out to the ice beam, which goes the extra mile and completely freezes over when you charge it. Additionally, you see those little hand symbols in the bottom right? Those correspond to the beams. Using the X-ray visor as you swap between said beams allows you to indeed see Samus alternating her hand signs. Is it useful? No, not at all. But it is cool. Samus's armor itself was likewise cool. The remaster has given us probably the best iteration of Samus's classic Varia suit with greatly updated lighting and textures. I've always been a fan of this suit design with its massive shoulder plates, iconic helmet and visor, and warm color scheme. The upgraded gravity suit then does a great job at contrasting this with an alternatively cool color palette. The blue lights and purple coat of paint perfectly capture the aquatic capabilities of the armor. Some might say it even suits it. Heh. And the Phazon suit? Chef's kiss, mwah! I read a comment that likened it to a sexy tuxedo, and I can't stop thinking about how incredibly accurate that comparison is. Like, god damn! This sleek black, accented by the deep red lights and an ethereal warping outline, is just plain awesome. The design at once feels familiar and alien, both recognizable and unknown. It's just a shame that you spend so much time in first person, so you don't really often get to see Samus's suit. The same can't be said for the Morph Ball, however. You only ever get to see this form in third person, so I'm glad it was given such a pleasing model. I'm relieved to say that the Morph Ball's variations were just as gorgeous as the Power Suit ones. The Phazon Suit's version of the Spider Ball is my personal fave. Red and black just so happen to be my weakness for color combinations. An iconic duo like Mario and Luigi, Don Quixote, and some sick kicks, or you and the subscribe button. Hey, who put that last one in there? Was that you, Kevin? And I'd be hard-pressed to cover all the aesthetic goodness of the remaster without bringing up the visor effects. This includes the visor fogging up from steam, static electricity from an EMP, droplets running down the visor as you exit a body of water, or Samus's reflection from a large enough blast. But what takes the cake is Talon Overworld's immaculate rain physics. As you can see, the rain hitting Samus's helmet changes depending on the direction faced. It's pretty straightforward. You look up, more rain hits the visor. You look down, all of a sudden there's no rain hitting your visor. Though the devs didn't stop right there, they took direction into account as well. Walk forward, more rain in your face. Walk in reverse, you get less. Imagine that. I'm, starting to realize now that I've yapped hella about Samus, so, speed around. Locations look stellar in the remaster, giving plenty of uglier textures and overhaul. Their attention to the finer details was apparent. The waterfalls of Talon Overworld, intricate wall carvings of the Chozo ruins, basalt columns in Magmore Caverns, or observatory hologram are key examples. Enemies also received a huge facelift from their original Prime designs. A passing glance at Flagra would be more than enough to tell you that Prime's remaster is a blessing, because my boy is even scarier now. Bro's finally in HD and I still can't tell what he's supposed to be. A beanstalk? A skeleton? A praying mantis? Who knows? But to me, all that matters is that he's our Skelebeanstalk Mantis. Metroid Prime was already ahead of its time in the original, but the remaster is for sure the definitive way to play. The environments are beautiful, filled to the brim with tons of tiny details that bring the locations to life. Samus's beams are equally elaborate, each having their own effects, hand placements, and shooting styles. Her suit and corresponding morph ball designs were also phenomenal. Furthermore, the multitude of visual effects like rain were greatly appreciated. There's good reason Metroid Prime Remastered became one of the best looking games on Switch. Therefore, it'd be a disservice to award it anything less than a perfect aesthetic rating of 10 out of 10. The Metroid series has always had a pretty fire soundtrack that elevates the atmospheric focus of the games. Fortunately, Metroid Prime is no different in this department. If there's one thing the locations universally excelled at, it was the music. The theme that plays when you initially land on Talon Overworld starts out alien. You've dropped into a new world alone, encircled by unfamiliarity everywhere. Soon, a piano sneaks in, followed by invigorating vocals that utilize the Brinstar music from Metroid 1. It's at that instance that you begin to feel it. This is Metroid. The other 4 areas did well to establish their own atmospheres as well. Chozo Ruins is quiet, with a lot of uncanny percussion that invokes a sense of mystery while you progress through the now-dead civilization. Magmore Caverns emphasizes the volcanic might of its caves through powerful drums and vocals. Vendrana Drifts, through a mix of piano, echoey whistles, and light vocals, reflects the vibe of traversing a wintry landscape. And Phazon Mines is kind of industrial sounding due to having a lot of distant ticking and crashing. Sorry, that last one is probably as descriptive as I can be since I ain't no musician and I can't tell what instruments are used here. The one thing is certain, it sounds ominous. Another aspect of the locations I really liked is that they remix their overworld themes as you trudge further in, Vendrana Drifts being an exemplary instance of this. It trades the fluttery instrumental of its surface theme for full-on electric beats that got everyone grooving. In other words, it went from chill to chill. And strictly speaking of the atmosphere itself, I personally believe there is no stronger moment in Metroid Prime than Samus's visit to the frigate's crash site. Beforehand, you may have your suspicions, but there is nothing quite concretely relating it to the ship from the opening. Yet. This changes immediately upon entering the vessel as you are greeted by a haunting melody. Everything is practically frozen in time, and for every corridor you traverse, it becomes clear. This is the frigate Orpheon. And by the time you come across the reactor core where you terminated the Parasite Queen, the music changes. What was once a cruel, cold, and corrupt facility has now become home to abundant wildlife. Rocks covered in lichen jut out of the walls, aquatic fauna roams the ventilation shafts, and familiar rooms are now either submerged or out of power. The tonal shift is represented through not just the visuals, but the music too. You're traversing the metal tomb of your enemies, and nature has claimed it. Heading in a completely separate direction, combat music was even better. Call me crazy, but the Space Pirate theme could very well be one of the top enemy themes my ears had ever had the pleasure of hearing. It's frantic and intense, having my heart racing, and the weird barking noises that's included is raw as hell. The electric guitar shredding was the cherry on top though. I don't know how to describe it other than equating it to a shrill or battle cry? Don't know, but I digged it. Boss themes were lovely too. I don't think there was a single boss that doesn't have their music in my playlist. They are that memorable. And yes, that includes mini bosses like the Incinerator Drone, cause they go hard. The title screen music is also a classic, setting the tone for the experience and giving you a little hint as for what to expect. I love the little squishy sounding distortions, followed by the faint main Metroid theme. It sounds tense and foreign without an ounce of grandeur, like say the Halo series theme. It prepares you for isolation the moment you boot up the game. Metroid Prime contains an outstanding OST that was created to enhance the atmosphere of the game. Locations evoke particular emotions in their overworld themes, yet switch it up as you push on into the depths. Enemies had music that matched their ferocity and overwhelming presence, and it came complete with a title screen theme that works wonders for getting the player immersed from the moment they open the game. If uniquely atmospheric music is what you're seeking, then I'm proud to say that Metroid Prime has you covered with a grand music rating of 10 out of 10. Alrighty guys, pop quiz! I said Metroidvanias are known for exploration and what other defining characteristic? If you said Metroids, you are incorrect! Huh? I said they're known for acquiring an assortment of upgrades to progress through the game? Boring. Yawn. Obviously, Metroidvanias are known for collectibles and 100% completion. Luckily, my goodie-gathering self was satiated by a plethora of optional items to pick up during my journey. Your energy, missiles, and power bombs have collectible expansions that increase the amount you have of each. Seeing or even hearing one of these nearby and strategizing how to obtain it was engaging and really just a lot of fun. A shame, though, that the remaster didn't add markers for which collectibles you've gathered, like the sequel games have. Newer players could find searching for the last couple of missile expansions to be a pain if they don't know which ones they've already picked up. Aside from those expansions, it's also very cool that the elemental beams each had their own optional missile combo. Finding these felt like an achievement, not because it was difficult, but because the game never gives any indication that these optional upgrades even exist. Reaching the wave buster atop a crumbling tower, blowing up a bridge to grab the ice spreader, and hacking into a security system to access the flamethrower. All of these are in rooms that you are required to pass through at least once during the game, yet the additional beam combos can be easily overlooked. And you can't forget Samus's nifty logbook. The scan visor provides more than just environmental information or lore. You can catalog enemy and mechanism data too. Filling out the logbook is greatly satisfying, but there are sadly missable scans that I had to be aware of. I'd say that Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door is a more player-friendly alternative, in the way that it allows you to collect limited enemy entries that you may have missed. It isn't the worst in Prime Remastered due to the added New Game Plus feature that preserves your scanned data between playthroughs. The downside being that it means playing through the entire game a second time. And for one dumb reason or another, hard mode is locked behind game completion, so I guess it kinda works out if you want to do another difficult run. Metroid Prime also has a gallery with concept art, character models, and a music library. This content can then be unlocked through game progression, 100%ing either item pickups or logbook scans, or beating hard mode. By the way, those item pickups in particular can reward you with a couple extra scenes at the end, which is neat. 75% has Samus taking off her helmets at the end, and 100% gives a preview of Dark Samus in the later Prime games. I think it's awesome that even players who missed an enemy scan or two have the ability to view these bonus scenes. And that's really just my thoughts on Prime's content as a whole. Pretty awesome. Collectible ammo expansions and scans gave me plenty to seek out over the course of my adventure. The optional beam combos were a welcome addition to those upgrades. However, between a lack of post-game, no markers for collected items, and missable scans, getting 100% can be unnecessarily annoying. But for those willing to push through, obtaining 100% completion anyways, you're rewarded with 2 added scenes and a bonus gallery of goodies. As for the runtime, you're looking at approximately 10 to 20 hours depending on how much you're looking to collect. Not too shabby. Sadly, the duration becomes a bit bloated by that last-minute artifact hunt. And not to sound like a broken record or anything, but I'm still kinda disappointed that hard mode is not available from the outset. Metroid Prime is a pretty fun collectathon, hindered by the absence of a few modern quality-of-life features. Therefore, a respectable content rating of 7 out of 10 seems fitting. And so, Metroid Prime has finally been completely critiqued. Well, here are the total scores for the game. And as usual, I must clarify that each rating does not necessarily determine the game's overall quality, since preferences can vary greatly between individuals. It's finally over. It was just so nice to finally go back and play the very game that tied me to a train heading towards... Okay, that's just mean and objectively wrong. Hey, you, 9-year-old me, get over here. You at least think my video on your favorite game is pretty epic, yeah? Oh, come on, little bro. You know that I critique games based on my own current opinions, right? What I thought of back then doesn't necessarily... Unk? Dude, I don't think that was even a word back then. How do you... Metroid Prime Remastered is truly the entire package. Improving many aspects while preserving the integrity of the original, I gotta commend Retro Studios for this banger of a release. Now all that's left is to get the other 2 games with the same treatment. We're getting that, right? Please? Also, if you enjoy this series, please consider subscribing, turning on notifications, and most importantly, tuning into the next one. Doing any or all would be 100% appreciated. And please, let me know if there was anything I missed or something you believe should have been rated differently. Anyways, this has been 100% Hunter, and as always, I hope you follow your instincts and continue the hunt. Until next time, friends.